There's an interesting story in the Bible that gives us not only biblical truth, but it gives us an insight into the unseen world. It gives us an insight, no pun intended, into how to see the unseen world, into quantum reality, into the things of which science is only now beginning to catch up to the Bible. In a book in the Bible called 2 Kings, there's a story of a man, a prophet by the name of Elisha, and his servant Gehazi. We won't get into the nuts and bolts of the entirety of the story, but we pick up reading and it says, Therefore the king of Syria sent thither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about, where the prophet was. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? This servant of Elisha wakes up and sees that the hills are filled with physical horses, chariots, soldiers, and army of Syria, and realizes that they are in grave physical danger. The Bible says, though, in verse 16, And he, Elisha, answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. Now what's interesting is that Elisha lived in a reality, a faith-based reality, no doubt about it. But maybe in this particular instance, not as much of faith as we would think. The Bible says in other locations we walk by faith, not by sight. But is it possible that Elisha saw something that Gehazi could not see? The answer, I believe, is yes. You see, Elisha was confident because Elisha could see a reality that Gehazi could not. And in the following verse, he says, Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. Now, this was no magic trick. There was not an incantation. And I believe the words are exactly conveying nothing symbolic, nothing analogous, nothing super duper spiritual in that weird twilight kind of an unreal world that we think of spirituality as being. I think it is a legitimate request. There was something closed about his eyes that the man prayed and asked for his eyes to be opened. And the Bible says, and the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. In other words, something happened to that young man. His eyes were open, literally, I believe. And he saw not only the physical, but he saw now the other dimensional. How did that happen? Well, we're going to be talking a little bit about that concept of the brain and the mind. The mind being the soul, the mind being the seat of perception, but the brain being the mechanism of perception. And I believe that as we get closer to the end of this age and we see more and more the pressing through of the veil from the other side, I believe that this concept of being able to see the spiritual, or rather the dimensional reality, is going to play a larger and larger role in the world in which we live in our day-to-day life. So much so that we may actually even begin to encounter these beings as a normative part of our life prior to the coming of the Lord. We're going to be talking about a subject that we've covered here before, but one that is very, very fascinating, and that is DMT, the spirit molecule, a very interesting book, along with a compendium book that was written, that I believe bridges the gulf between the chemical and the spiritual, and I use that word specifically, the electrical and the spiritual, the brain and the mind, what is seen and what is not seen. Now, in one of the most interesting books that we have covered here, and it comes out of the Soul Trap Library, is a book written by a distinctly non-Christian, and I would even say possibly more of a materialist, maybe not so much now, but more of a materialist than a spiritualist, Dr. Rick Strassman, a medical doctor, called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, a doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near-death and mystical experiences. Now, the term DMT, spirit molecule, comes from the book that we just mentioned by Dr. Rick Strassman, a clinical psychiatrist and researcher. In the book, Dr. Straussman explores the powerful psychedelic compound of DMT, and he proposes that it may be a biological gateway to a mystical or spiritual experience. In other words, there is something very interesting at the very touch point of where the physical world meets the spiritual world. In fact, we see that operating in our own brain, and I use that word specifically. So, brain, waves, communication, interplay within your mind, all of that takes place by way of chemicals called neurotransmitters. Here's how it works. Neurons, nerve cells, are the main communicators in the brain. When a neuron wants to send a message, it releases neurotransmitters, a chemical messenger, into the small gaps between neurons called the synapse. These chemicals bind to receptors on the next neuron, passing along the message. Afterward, the neurotransmitters are either broken down or taken back up by the first neuron, a process called reuptake, so the system is ready for the next signal. Some well-known neurotransmitters include dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate, and others. Now, what we're talking about here is that at the very minuscule point of where our brain communicates, there is a chemical balance. Sometimes people have posited a chemical imbalance. But there is something electrical, something minute, something almost subatomic that combines the mind and the brain. The conjecture is that there is something called DMT, a molecule, and that DMT is the touchstone, the keystone, so to say, between our world and the other dimension. Now, what is DMT? DMT is a naturally occurring psychedelic compound. It's found in many plants, some animals, and in trace amounts in the human body. It is a tryptamine, structurally similar to serotonin and other neurotransmitters. Now the question is, why is it called the spirit molecule? Well, Dr. Straussman in his book coined the term spirit molecule because of several reasons. First of all, in his research, subjects often reported intensely profound spiritual, I use the words distinctly, or otherworldly experiences while under the influence of DMT. Secondly, many users describe contact with entities or beings, feelings of leaving their body or visiting alternate dimensions. Thirdly, these experiences, conducted in clinical, hospital, scientific research rooms, resembled highly religious, mystical, or shaman-like visions. And the question is there a connection? Now, some have asked whether DMT is naturally produced in the body. Although it is found in trace amounts, is it something that is a naturally produced phenomenon within the body? The truth is, this remains unproven, but some people believe that it is plausible. DMT has been detected in the pineal gland of rats, and it is speculated, although not confirmed, that it has been produced and is produced in the human pineal gland as well. Dr. Straussman hypothesized that DMT might be released in large amounts during birth, death, or near-death experiences, all of which would be classified in a highly traumatic point of view, or a highly traumatic experience of life. It's interesting because you have to wonder sometimes when you look back at the Aztecs, or you look at the Philistines, or you look at these different regions where there were highly intensified human sacrifices, along with or accompanied with ceremonies, music, if those ancients weren't getting at that same thing. We'll come back to that in just a moment when we talk about Hunter S. Thompson. Now, there are legal and scientific ramifications. In most countries, DMT is a Schedule I controlled substance, meaning it's illegal and considered to have no accepted medical use. However, scientific interest in DMT and other psychedelics has increased in recent years, particularly for their therapeutic potential in mental health. Remember that as well, we'll come back to that. The pineal gland itself has fascinated scientists, mystics, and philosophers for centuries. and it's often surrounded by both scientific fact and speculative mysticism. Here's what we do know about the pineal gland. First of all, we know that it regulates the circadian rhythms. Now, that's an interesting thing to think about, too. One of the things that we're seeing happening with modern man, because of the phones, because of technology, because of doom scrolling, you go to bed at 9 o'clock, you don't go to sleep till 2. You go to bed checking something real quick on Facebook. Next thing you know, it's 1:30 in the morning and you're watching a squirrel ski or two Russians slap fight. We're finding that the circadian rhythm of the average Westerner has been totally thrown off. What we're also seeing is that because of a lack of sleep or circadian rhythm to our sleep, people are more unhealthy, more depressed, more anxious. Their cortisol levels are higher. It is a cascading effect. Well, the pineal gland regulates circadian rhythm. Question: is it possible that when you're looking at this thing at 1 in the morning, it's actually affecting the pineal gland, which is actually affecting your circadian rhythm, which may actually be affecting your connection to the spirit world? Here's a thought. Could it be that the blindness that we talk about happening spiritually to our world is actually not just a spiritual mental blindness, but it is indeed a biological, physical, real blindness? Just like with Gehazi, a real biological something happened to his eyes that allowed him now to perceive a reality that was already there, a dimension that was side by side with his own current physical dimension. Could it be that that is what is happening now? We'll come back to that. The pineal gland regulates, as we said, circadian rhythm. The main function is to produce melatonin, a problem that we're having today, a hormone that regulates the sleep cycle, the sleep-wake cycle. It responds to light and darkness via signals from the cerebromastic nucleus in the brain. Melatonin production increases in darkness, helping you feel sleepy, and decreases in light. In other words, notice light, darkness, circadian rhythm affecting the pineal gland, everything that you and I are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Its location, we know, is in the brain. It's not a very large size organ. It is a tiny pea-sized gland, about 5 to 8 centimeters long, located deep in the center of the brain between two hemispheres near the third ventricle. Its deep central location and single midline nature are unusual among brain stems, among brain structures. It contains light-sensitive cells. In some non-mammals, like reptiles, a type of, well, I digress, and birds, a type of, don't let me digress, the pineal gland acts like a third eye. In humans, it quote-unquote no longer functions this way, but it still indirectly responds to light via the brain. I wonder if in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sinned and they were cursed, they were able to communicate with animals, they were able to communicate with one another. I wonder if something got turned off biologically in the pineal gland. You see, it's important to ask these questions because we tend to think, as I mentioned earlier, of the spirit world, of the Bible, of being sort of a chicken soup for the soul, a non-real, sort of a twilightish, ambiguous kind of a thing. But as we have submitted here at the Soul Trap so very often, there is far more deeper quantum, chemical, real connection between the Bible and the world in which we live than we could ever imagine. We are only now, I believe, beginning to scratch the surface with how advanced our Bible truly is. Now, philosophically and mystically, the pineal glands are very interesting. Some people believe that it's the seat of the soul. I'm not so sure about that. The Bible clearly teaches that the soul has a shape, a bodily shape, and I believe it's very possible to recognize a soul. Nonetheless, René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher, believed the pineal gland was the seat of the soul, where the mind and the body, the immaterial and the material, connect. He thought it was the only unpaired structure in the brain and thus uniquely suited for this role. Associated with the third eye is Eastern religion. In the Eastern spiritual traditions like Hinduism and Buddhism, the pineal gland is often linked to the Ajna chakra, or the third eye, said to be the center of intuition, insight, and higher consciousness. Meditative and psychedelic experiences are sometimes described as quote-unquote activating this inner eye. DMT and the pineal gland have been speculated by men like we've just mentioned. Dr. Rick Strassman proposed that the gland might produce DMT, a powerful natural psychedelic, especially at the time of birth, death, or near-death experiences. Now, what's fascinating about his book is some of the experiments that he conducted and the first-hand accounts of people that were in, remember, a clinical setting, experiencing something that would be clearly non-clinical. What he experienced was another world, another dimension, other beings, other reality. And what's fascinating about it is the descriptions that they give often match up and line up with descriptions that you would find in a religious text. So let's take just a moment and read a couple of accounts that Dr. Strassman gives in his book of some of these experiments. Chris, he writes, was 35 years old, married, and a computer salesman. He was quite artistically talented too and performed in local theater productions. He had taken psychedelics 50 to 60 times before starting our research. He hoped his DMT sessions with us would, quote, propel me into a state of awareness I have been seeking during 8 years of LSD use, but have only had glimpses of previously. His non-blind high dose was the most reassuring experience of my life. The separation of his mind and body was effortless, and he decided that if death is like this, there's nothing to worry about. Chris returned for the tolerance study a few weeks later. He lifted the eye shades after the first dose and said, quote, there was a set of many hands. They were feeling my eyes and face. It was a little bit confusing. There were more individuals. They were recognizing and identifying me. It was more intimate. At first, I thought it was the eye shades on my face, but it definitely was not. Filling out the rating scale, he added, to get to that space, I had to get through some sort of non-benevolent space. It felt like there were talons and claws there trying to guard it in a way. These were long mornings and he needed encouragement. I let my intuition guide me. Quote, if need be, let them rip you to shreds, then you can get on with it. Dismemberment is a part of the shamanistic initiation, isn't it? I felt a dragon-like presence, he stated, and there were the same colors, red, golden yellows. The colors can be like a drape or prelude or a curtain. Even though they're so pretty, you can get through them to the other side. Coming out of this second dose, he looked stunned and he grasped for words, what seemed to be inadequate words. It was wild, he stated. There were no colors. There was the usual sound, pleasant, a roar, a sort of internal hum. Then there were three beings, three physical forms. There were rays coming out of their bodies and then back to their bodies. They were reptilian and humanoid, trying to make me understand not with words but with gestures. They wanted me to look into their bodies. I saw inside them and understood reproduction, what it's like before birth, the passage into the body. Once I established what they were communicating, they didn't just fade away. They stayed there for quite a while. Their presence was very solid. Now, is he just describing a bad trip? Or was Chris here describing something that he saw on the other side? Now, if he was describing something that he saw on the other side, the question then becomes, how did he get there? The answer was a chemically induced condition opened his consciousness, his soul, his immaterial being to the immaterial world in which you and I bump up against to every single day. Now, if that can be done by accident by a doctor with clinical trials and limited ability, the question is, can that be done on a mass scale intentionally with demonic design? All right, let's listen to another description. Here we have another description of someone experiencing something very similar in one of their tests. It was time to try again. We're going to put a blanket on you to try to breathe into that tension if you can. He slowed his breathing and started calming down, a big smile on his face. He stayed silent for 36 minutes, longer than most of our volunteers, before I felt the urge to rouse him. It started with a sound, he said. It was high-pitched like a tightly taut wire. There were 4 or 5 of them. They were on me fast. As crazy as this sounds, they looked like cactuses, Peruvian in color. They were flexible, fluid, geometrical, not solid. They weren't benevolent, but they weren't non-benevolent. They probed. They really probed. They seemed to know time was limited. They wanted to know what I, this being who had shown up, was doing. I didn't answer. They knew. Once they decided I was okay, they went about their business. Interesting. Here the doctor mentions you have sound and vibration until the scene almost explosively shifts into a quote-unquote alien realm. The highly intelligent beings of this other world are interested in the subject, seemingly ready for his or her arrival and wasting no time in quote getting to work. He goes on to write, there might be one particular being clearly in charge directing the others. Volunteers frequently comment about the emotional quality of their relationships, loving, caring, or professionally detached. Their quote-unquote business appeared to be testing, examining, probing, and even modifying the volunteer's mind and body. Here's another response from Dr. Schausman's research. Rex's response, he writes, to the first dose of DMT, the non-blind low dose, was surprisingly strong, and I knew he would be having some powerful experiences the next day. At 5 minutes after the low-dose injection, he said, quote, there was a humming sound. I couldn't tell if it was the air conditioner. Then I felt like I was suddenly in the presence of an alien or aliens, vaguely humanoid. They were serpentine colors surrounding them, producing an outline of their shape. Based on my reading, I expected leprechauns, not anything like this. The bed was spinning, rocking. It was uncomfortable, alarming. There was some constriction in my chest. That feeling then turned into the alien's presence. I tried to make contact and relax into it. It seemed a lot more in control than I was. It was interested in my fear and in me. Perfect love, the Bible says, casteth out fear. Fear has torment. I remember, he writes, that feeling from when I was a child, when I was scared. I would relax and say to myself, the worst thing that can happen is I'll go to God when I was afraid. Do you see the commonality of what they're reporting? Here was another report. When I was first going under, there were these insect creatures all around. Reptilian, serpentine, insect. Lord of the Flies, Beelzebub. Interesting. They were clearly trying to break through. I was fighting letting go of who I am or was. The more I fought, the more demonic they became, probing into my psyche and being. I finally started letting go of parts of myself as I could no longer keep so much of me together. That almost sounds like a split personality. It almost sounds like schizophrenia. Remember that. We'll come back to that as well. As I did, I still clung to the idea that all was God and that God was love, and I was giving myself up to God and God's love because I was certain I was dying. As I accepted my death and disillusion into God's love, the insectoids began to feed on my heart, devouring the feelings of love and surrender. They feasted on his feelings, almost like emotional vampires. It's not like LSD, he wrote. Things really closed in around me in comparison to the spaciousness that I feel with LSD. There was no feeling of space. Everything was close. I've never seen anything like that. They were interested in emotion. You ever make you wonder why horror movies are so powerful? Pornography, violence, music. As I was holding on to the last thought that God equals love, they said, even here, with a question mark? I said, yes, of course. They were still there, but I was making love to them at the same time. They feasted as they made love to me. I don't know if they were male or female or something else. Transgender, androgynous. But it was extremely alien, though not necessarily unpleasant. The thought came to me with certainty that they were manipulating my DNA, changing its structure. That's what was happening on the other side with just a few of these case studies. Now the question we've been posing is, how are they getting to the other side? The answer is the DMT, a chemical-induced condition that somehow or another is bridging the gulf between the material and the non-material. Well, there is another very interesting book called the DMT Dialogues. I highly recommend you get the first one by Dr. Straussman. There is a follow-up as well. The DMT Dialogues, Encounters with the Spirit Molecule. It is a roundtable discussion, a fascinating study of what goes on. Now, the DMT molecule, or the DMT Dialogue, Encounters with the Spirit Molecule, is a book that explores the powerful psychedelic compound of DMT itself through a series of conversations with leading thinkers in the fields of science, philosophy, mysticism. The book is edited by David Luke with contributions from prominent figures such as Dr. Straussman, Graham Hancock, Rupert Sheldrake, and Dennis McKenna. Now, the core focus of the book is very interesting. The book is based on a series of roundtable discussions at a convention, a break-in convention, a major psychedelic conference in the UK. What did they dive into? Now, these are not nut jobs. These are very, very intelligent men and women studying something. They studied the nature of consciousness, the ontological status of DMT entities. That's the question. DMT entities. Are they real? Psychological projections? Maybe. Or are they real dimensional beings? The other question that they discussed is the possibility of non-human intelligence, or shamanic perspectives and indigenous knowledge. Also scientific challenges in studying DMT and parallels with near-death experiences and mystical states. The key themes come from the philosophy of the mind. What does DMT tell us about the nature of consciousness? Scientific inquiry versus mystical experience. Can science, and we must use that word very loosely now, especially since 2020, but can science adequately study and describe what happens during a, quote, DMT trip? Or for that matter, can science actually describe what is happening at the chemical level of any experience? Then there are the entity encounters. Not a few, massive numbers. Many users report encountering beings or intelligences. The book itself contrasts Western materialistic views with indigenous and religious and esoteric frameworks. This has been around for a long time. The truth of the matter is, modern Christians, especially our 1990s and 2000 Christians, we are the most materialistic people in all the world. With our suburban homes, our two-car garages, our club memberships, all these kind of things, we have detached ourselves from the spiritual reality that this book has told us about for 2,000 years. And now science is finally saying, oh yes, by the way, you were right all along. The greatest joke ever played was the joke of Darwin materialism, when in reality the world has known behind closed doors for a very long time that they, whoever they are there. How do we get to them? I submit to you that we have known, or rather the world has known, how to get to them for a very, very long time. And if you really want to get an idea on how to get to them, you don't necessarily have to go to a Harvard clinical study. You can go to Hollywood. A famous writer by the name of Hunter S. Thompson, the infamous Hunter S. Thompson, wrote a book which was later made into a movie by Johnny Depp called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas was by Hunter S. Thompson, and it includes vivid and surreal hallucinations induced by heavy drug use. And some people believe that he's actually talking about the DMT, and that DMT is able to be extracted at the death of people. It does explicitly discuss seeing in the movie and in the book, seeing entities in the mystical or paranormal sense, as in spiritual beings, aliens, or interdimensional entities, often associated with psychedelics. It does depict bizarre, grotesque visions and altered perceptions of reality that border on entity-like encounters. For example, lizard people. Notice the reptilian theme. In fact, one of the most famous scenes that we've had recently is from the lead singer, or the former lead singer of Smashing Pumpkins, who on a nationwide mainstream broadcast talked about the transformation, the shape-shifting of a being in front of him.
What happened? Give me a for instance. I want to know.
I'm turning red. I'm so embarrassed.
No, don't be embarrassed. Come on, share. Why not? We have to discuss these things.
Let's just say I was with somebody once and I saw a transformation that I can't explain.
The person transformed into something other than human.
Yes, I saw it.
Were you on drugs?
I was not. I was totally sober.
Wow.
You were talking. I'm asking you some questions. If you were talking to someone,
yes,
and you're having a conversation
yes,
like we are now,
yeah,
this close, and the person suddenly, not in a hallucination, they said to you, "Look, something's going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to morph into something else," and you're like, "This is ridiculous."
That's not how it happened.
Give me a please. I want to see this.
Imagine you're doing something and suddenly you turn around and there's somebody else standing there.
A different human.
Sorta. It's hard to explain without going to detail. I'd rather not go into details.
Okay, but did you say to the person, "What'd you just do here?" That's
yes,
not you.
And they acknowledged it.
And what did they say they were? From another planet?
They wouldn't explain.
Why not?
Again.
Lizard people. One of the most iconic scenes involves Raoul Duke, the narrator, hallucinating that everyone in a bar has turned into giant predatory lizards. This is described in intense visceral detail and is arguably the closest the book gets to, quote, entity encounters. Then there are talking objects and warped faces, sounding very schizophrenic-like. Throughout the book, people's faces distort, inanimate objects seem to move or speak, and the world becomes dreamlike and threatening. And then there is the personification of fear and paranoia. Very interesting, because in the Bible there is the personification of death and hell. The book is a deep dive into how drug-induced paranoia can make the mind project fear outward in the form of malevolent presences or scenarios, which sometimes feel like entities of the psyche rather than beings with their own agency. Maybe that's true. Maybe it is the brain itself projecting into the visual cortex view something that it wants. Or maybe it is the brain being rewired and reprogrammed to see what Paul said was there in Ephesians chapter 6, verse number 12. So while it's not about meeting elves or spirits in a spiritual realm, Fear and Loathing definitely explores the kind of intense, hallucinated reality where such experiences could feel real. I would posit to you that it could possibly be showing us what is real. It's more about the breakdown of reality than any kind of mystical insight. If you're looking for literature that leans more into the spiritual or metaphysical side of seeing entities, there are works by Terence McKenna, Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception, and Daniel Pinbeck's Breaking Open the Head that would really get you down the road of spiritual insanity. Of course, one of the things that happens quite a bit with DMT and the study of these shaman experiences is the connection of hearing voices. One of the things that's come up recently is the similarities between DMT experiences and schizophrenia, which we've already mentioned. For instance, there is an altered reality perception. Both involve intense distortions of perception, visual, auditory, and even tactile hallucinations. DMT users often report experiences of otherworldly beings or realities, much like schizophrenic hallucination or delusions. There is also the disillusion of the ego. Both can involve a breakdown of the normal sense of self. Some would argue that sounds like demon possession. In schizophrenia, this may manifest as delusions of grandeur or paranoia. In DMT trips, it may feel like becoming one with the universe or losing personal identity. There's also disrupted thought patterns, thought disorganization, loose associations. Tangential thinking is a hallmark of schizophrenia and also appears in DMT experiences. Then there is hyperactivity in certain brain regions when tested. DMT, like some forms of psychosis, is associated with increased activity in the DMN, the default mode network. It is the serotonergic system involving receptors. In other words, the brain is running wild with electrical connectivity. Now, all this is very fascinating. The question is there a connection to the spirit world? Is there a connection to the Bible? Well, I tend to think that there may be, especially as we get to the end time, especially when we get to the book of Revelation, and we find that the Greek word in Revelation translated as sorcery, correctly so, in the Greek is actually Pharmakeia. It appears 3 times in Revelation chapter number 9, verse 21, and again in Revelation chapter number 18, verse 23. Sorcery, Pharmakeia. That word comes from the root pharmakeion, meaning drug, poison, or spell. In classical Greek, it referred to the use of drugs for healing or for poisoning. In the New Testament context, especially in Revelation, it takes on a negative connotation associated with witchcraft, magic, and deceptive practices. What are the broader implications? It is that Pharmakeia can refer to practices of occult magic or the use of mind-altering substances tied to idolatry and deception. It is also connected with spiritual corruption or manipulation. We see this word sorcery show up again in Galatians chapter 5, verse number 20, the same thing. So are we seeing a rise in the Pharmakeia? Are we seeing a rise in sorcery? Are we seeing a rise in the brain of the Western man being affected so that the mind itself can now be opened to a world it has been closed off to? Well, statistics seem to bear that out. In the general population, it's certainly happening. A national study using pharmacy claims data found that the number of patients receiving psychotropic medications and the total number of prescriptions have been on the increase in significant numbers of population. The average days supply is at an all-time high and growing exponentially day by day. College students are shown in research that indicates that the psychiatric medication prescription for college students has been rising since 2007, with notable increase during the pandemic and even after. In 2021, prescriptions rose by 41%. 41%. And then there is the adolescents and young adults. A study published in Pediatrics revealed that monthly antidepressant prescriptions jumped more than 66% between January 2016 and December 2022, with a massive increase in 2020. The surge is attributed to mental health impact and more clear understanding of mental health in young people. One of the things that's fascinating also is to see the connection between DMT and schizophrenia. And especially when you see the schizophrenic simulators that are out there.
It's cool. But you don't have to be. Schizophrenia simulator, my daily experience. You were here as a kid. What's he talking about? He's the shadow. He's the tree. He's undulating. Look. It's us. I'm on a tree. Projected on the trees. Look up the words. No, it isn't. I'm just a hill of the road out of what you're wrong. Underside of the it's all the same. Don't neglect in the basement of your subconscious. In the basement. I'm kind, but I have to. It's beautiful. You don't find magic. You create magic. It's really harsh land. Is this where frogs live? Those crows? Oh, ghostly crows. Look at that beautiful little whiskery cat. There's some good things under the tree. It looks like dirt, but it's all just things.
So we've gone a long way to come back to this simple question that we have to ask ourselves. It is a two-part question. A, is there an unseen world beyond our biological sense capability? Well, the answer must be yes. The Bible tells us so. Science is telling us so. Quantum reality tells us so. Human anthropological history tells us so. And our instinct tells us so. That sixth sense, so to say, or that third eye. So if there is something beyond this biological veil, how do we get at it? How do we pierce it? Some people would argue in a lot of different ways. But is it possible that at the most basic point between brain and mind, there is a way to chemically alter the perception of the brain to more clearly align with the reality of the mind? We are living in very unusual times. Times when the material and the immaterial will no longer be separated. Times when we will be seeing things like in Revelation chapter 9, beasts, animals coming out of the depths. We will now begin to see what we have been closed off to for so long. And it makes you wonder, when you start connecting transgender, the abduction cases, and AI, if we are not moving headlong into a brain awakening, a moment, a point in time where the brain now returns all the way back to the Garden of Eden, where the biological brain is aligned with the metaphysical mind, and we now see both heaven and hell, both the immaterial and the material, both light and dark, both that which can be touched and that which cannot be touched on the other side of the veil.
I've been told that you were born again, basically, 3 or 4 months ago, that you found a place where, and I'd like you to explain this to me, the toad. I'd like you to explain the toad to me.
Do you understand the toad?
Is it like ayahuasca?
No, it takes you to another level. Ayahuasca is nothing compared to this.
Is it called DMT?
Yes. The toad, and it's on the Sonora Desert, and it has the venom in it. You smoke it. Once I tried it, boom! Everything is so fast. And when I fell out, the only thing I was conscious of, I was out. My brain was still functioning, my thoughts, I could still talk to myself, I could hear my mind. And it's really mind-blowing.
Spiritual in nature, though, right? Like you're just...
Yeah, really, my whole life totally changed. It sounds like a movie script, but it's really the real deal.
At that moment, you're talking about like you come to and you are altered. You are altered and it stays.
I don't know. I wake up, I'm happy, I'm laughing, smiling, I say, what the
Really?
happened? Yeah.
Really?
I had no idea.
So sex, cocaine, championship belt, those weren't happiness?
Nothing, no. It lasted forever, but it was only 15 minutes. But it felt like hours.
Mm-hmm.
It was frightening.
Because of that ego thing, because you realize you're small all of a sudden.
Yeah, once I realized that I'm nothing, I realized all my fancy clothes, my big clothes.
Can you explain to me why it makes you emotional just talking about it? Because I imagine the reason it makes you emotional is because for 4 decades you've been trying to find happy, man.
You know, when you think you know everything, and then you realize you don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big awakening. You can call it growth or you can call it divine intervention.
You do realize you're talking about the toad like someone would talk about God, right?
And I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet.
One thing that happens when you do this is you're confronted with entities. Now, I don't know what these things are, but they seem to be communicating with you, and they seem to be talking to you, and they seem to know everything about you. So the question is, like, is that really your subconscious? Is this, what you know about yourself stripped down to some very bare, raw form, and then confronted with the psychedelics that perturb your visual cortex, so they provide you with all these intense visualizations? Or is it a chemical portal to another dimension? The way I describe it is they're complex geometric patterns made out of love and understanding.
Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind.
On planet Earth, I just remember this single beam of white light kind of shooting from the top and going all the way down. It sort of felt like it went through to infinity from top to bottom, and there was this giant architectural fractalized multicolored being with a face the size of a skyscraper. It was just looking me dead in the face. I couldn't move. All I could do was just stare directly into the eyes of this thing. It didn't speak, but it communicated telepathically, so I could hear what it was thinking. It projected its thoughts into my mind, and it said, "How did you get here?" I couldn't respond because I didn't have a mouth. The next thing it said, "There's no use in you being here, so we'll just have to wait." And all I could do was just stare directly in its eyes in silence and wait. And the world slowly dissolved, and I came back to reality, no longer face to face with this giant alien being.
Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.